My name is Paul Murphy. I'm the director of the Institute of Catholic Studies, and I'm working here in collaboration with Ed Hannenberg, who is the Green Chair in Systematic Theology in our Department of Theology. He's also a triple domer. He graduated from there, I think, in 1967, in 1995. I want to start, if you'll permit me, just to mention that the Institute of Catholic Studies was established 20 years ago this semester through the benefactions of Jack and Mary Jane Breen, who have been very generous benefactors of numerous Catholic organizations in the Diocese of Cleveland, here at John Carroll at St. Ignatius High School, Ursuline College. He also served on the advisory board of the Mendoza College of Business at the University of Notre Dame. And we learned, sadly, that Jack passed away this morning at about 1:30. In many respects, Jack is one of the reasons we're here. I hold the Breen Chair in Catholic Studies, and Hannenberg holds the Breen Chair in Catholic Systematic Theology. So please keep Mary Jane and the Breen family in your prayers as we gather this evening. I'd like to invite, to introduce our primary guests, I'd like to invite from our own Department of Education here, Professor Dan Reynolds, who's also a graduate of the University of Notre Dame and an old acquaintance of Father Nuzzi. So, Dan, here. Thank you very much. And welcome again to John Carroll.
Thanks everybody for being here tonight. I want to welcome everybody from the Notre Dame Club of Cleveland. This event started, I think, sometime back in the summer when the president of the Notre Dame Club of Cleveland, Mike Ferkovic, reached out to the Teachers Committee of the Notre Dame Club of Cleveland, who has been trying to facilitate conversations amongst teachers, educators, and Catholic school leaders all around Northeast Ohio. And Mike suggested that the Teachers Committee might be interested in hosting this lecture. So I want to say thank you to anybody who's here from the Teachers Committee. Thanks for all your work in putting that together. And thanks to everybody from the Notre Dame Club of Cleveland who's come out tonight to make connections amongst Catholic school educators, teachers, leaders, and any advocates all around this area. I want to also recognize our Department of Education. We have our chair, Mark Storrs, here, and our Education Leadership Coordinator, Dr. Lisa Schoaf, who are, both of them are working together to, of course, strengthen our education program here at John Carroll, but also build an educational leadership program that's ready to supply the kind of leadership that our schools need going forward. So, with that in mind, I'm about to introduce Father Ron Nuzzi, who is the Senior Director Emeritus of the REMIC Program for Educational Leadership through the Alliance for Catholic Education at the University of Notre Dame. I first heard about Father Nuzzi probably 15 years ago when I was doing ACE, and his reputation as a Catholic education thinker, as a leader in Catholic educational leadership, scholarship, and service is well known to probably most of you. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Father Nuzzi.
Thank you, Dan. Good evening, friends. Thanks so much for coming out tonight. It was a beautiful day today, eh? Yeah. You have to excuse me for up-talking. I just got back from Australia, so I go up at the end of all my sentences. So, thank you to the Notre Dame Club for the invitation. And thanks so much to our friends John Carroll for hosting in such a beautiful facility and for your warm welcome, too. We do share a common commitment to and ministry in Catholic education. I'm just delighted to be able to be here this evening with all of you to share a little bit of my own work and thinking and mission as far as Catholic education and its future goes. We've called the presentation Catholic Schools, Pope Francis, and the New Evangelization. That's a big chunk. It's probably a whole semester's worth. You're going to get it in an hour. But what I wanted to do was highlight some of the strengths historically of Catholic education, point out some of the major challenges facing Catholic education, and really put it in the context of the Pope's own solicitude and concern for Catholic education as we live through this period of what we hope will be a new evangelization and a renaissance, not only of Catholic education, but of the Catholic faith. I'll begin where I'm going to end. Namely, it's hard to imagine a bright future for the Church. It's hard to imagine a renaissance of the Catholic faith or Catholic living without a vibrant and robust Catholic school system. I'd like to begin with a iconic Notre Dame image. I'm sorry about Saturday night. It's we're outside of my control. But in addition to the lady on the dome, one of the more popular iconic images on campus is the Word of Life mural that is covering the entrance to Hesburgh Library on campus. Its name given by the artist is the Word of Life mural, but of course the whole world kind of lovingly and pedestrianly calls it Touchdown Jesus. They call it Touchdown Jesus for two reasons. One is because, as you can see in the picture of the mural, Jesus, he's in this resurrected posture, and some people think it looks like a football referee. It's actually just kind of a resurrection pose, but looks like a referee signaling a touchdown. The second reason people call it Touchdown Jesus is, if you've ever been to campus, the mural aligns with the north end zone of the stadium somewhat perfectly. It was an architectural accident, I'm sure. I want to call your attention to the image, if I may, briefly, because in our playfulness of, Touchdown Jesus, and, people come by and take their picture in front of it, doing this. In our playfulness of calling it Touchdown Jesus, I fear sometimes we miss what the artist was after and what the university was after by putting this particular image on the mural. If you look closely at the mural, and you can Google it later, you can see that there are all kinds of people under Jesus. You say, who are these people? Well, who these people are people whose works you might find in the library. They're prophets and poets and biblical evangelists and musicians and lawyers and kings and queens, and you can see crowns and architects and lawyers, and they sort of symbolically represent sort of the knowledge that's in the library. All caught up under the resurrected Jesus. The Word of Life mural is trying to say to our students, I don't care what you're studying. I don't care what paper you're coming here to write. I don't care what course you're working on, or in the language of undergrads. I don't care what your major is. All knowledge, all learning, all human growth is somehow caught up in the love of God that comes to us in Jesus Christ. It's making an important claim about what a Catholic education is. It's whole, it's integral, it's integrated. And no matter what subject or discipline, all human growth, all human knowledge, all human development advances us on the way to salvation. Theologian Michael Heim said it this way. It's just a three-word sentence, but it's a very packed three-word sentence. Heim said, whatever humanizes, divinizes. Whatever humanizes, divinizes. Whatever helps your God-given gifts to grow advances you on the way to holiness. Whatever brings into full bloom the gifts that the good Lord has blessed you with helps you on the way to salvation. I say this is an important Catholic conviction because sometimes, especially those of you who are educators may recognize this complaint, sometimes we don't make that connection. Right? We think that certain disciplines or athletics or the arts are somehow something different from Catholic education, or that Catholic education is limited to religious education or education in theology. I had a high school coach tell me once, volleyball coach, Father, if you insist, I'll pray before volleyball practice, but I don't do religion. I'm the volleyball coach. Religion's not my thing. You teach young, in this case women, to run and jump and hit and spike and set and serve and use their, what Gardner would call bodily kinesthetic intelligence for volleyball. You're helping the image of God in these young women come out. You're helping them use and develop their God-given gifts. Volleyball is highly catechetical activity. And it's coaches who see and believe that are exactly the ones we want to embrace in Catholic education at every level. I don't have the expertise in every content area to take you through the curriculum, but I know plenty of folks who do, who, in teaching advanced mathematics, for example, point out the beauty and the wonder of the Fibonacci sequence and how it repeats in flowers and in trees and in honeycombs. They're fond of talking about the golden ratio and how it appears everywhere, even in the design of the modern day credit card, suggesting that there is some mysterious force at the heart of the universe. We just happen to believe it's gracious and good and call it God. That's what the Word of Life Touchdown Jesus mural is offering. An integration, a respect. As a matter of fact, one of my favorite documents on on Catholic education says this. It could have been the reflection on the Word of Life mural. If you understand the incarnation of Jesus, there's really no such thing as a secular subject. If you truly understand the mission and ministry of Jesus, what he came to teach and who he was, there's really no such thing as a secular subject. All learning, all human growth, all human development, all humanization is divinization. This attitude and thinking closely aligns with the thinking of Pope Francis, who very early on in his papacy called for a world meeting, a world congress of Catholic educators. You gotta love the personal touches of the Holy Father. Taking a selfie with teenagers in St. Peter's. I mean, who does that? I don't do that. Or lovingly dealing with the precocious child who comes up in the middle of his talk and tugs on his cassock without making a scene or calling for security. There's a human touch there, a personal touch, a compassion, an understanding that all human growth and development somehow brings us closer to God. I was in Rome last year for a conference adjoining the Vatican, and everyone there was talking about an Italian priest from Bergamo. His name was Nicolino. They called him Father Lino. Apparently, Father Lino came to Rome with his youth group. And his youth group, high school teens, were staying with him at the Casa Santa Marta, where the Pope lives, which is a guest house when Rome is not busy. And it's kind of a cheap guest house to stay in, especially if you're with 2 or 3 dozen students. I don't know how well you know your hotels, but people say of the Casa Santa Marta, where the Pope lives, it's the Hampton, not the Hilton. It's nice and clean, but it's nothing fancy. Mm-hmm. Father Lino's staying at the casa with his students, and as any priest would, offered to celebrate the morning mass at the guest house. It's at 6:30 a.m. There wasn't another priest around that day, so they told Father Lino the mass was his. Father Lino tells all of his students, 20-some high school students. We're getting up tomorrow morning for Mass at 6:30. Make sure you're there. Got everybody up at 6 o'clock. Father Lino goes down to the sacristy at 6:15 to get ready for Mass. And who does he find sitting in the sacristy, sitting down, all dressed with his vestments on, ready for Mass? But Pope Francis. Oh my God, Father Lino says, it's so good to meet you. I didn't know you were going to be here. Why don't you take the Mass? I don't want to, Pope says, oh, nice to meet you. I hear your students are here. They'll be happy for you to have Mass. Why don't you take the Mass? Father Lino says, no, Holy Father, they'll just be honored to have you say the Mass. You say the Mass. Father Lino says, well, no, I can't say, no. So you can only argue with the Pope so much. He insisted that Father Lino take the Mass, and Father Lino took a picture. Pope took his vestments off, went and sat in the last row, and went to Mass. I'm sure there are a few people in the room who are aware of the liturgical rubrics in the Roman Rite, and this violates a few of them. I say early on, the Pope embraced the mission of Catholic education worldwide, primary, secondary, and tertiary, K-12 as well as higher education, by calling a World Congress back in 2015. Mostly because of a concern for the spread of the faith and the future of the faith, but also to show a solicitude and offer some affirmation to those who work in Catholic education around the world, in the developed as well as in developing nations, to encourage them to persevere, to share best practices, conduct some common research on how we might best contribute not only to the evangelization of culture, but simply even to human development around the world. The conference highlighted several international outcomes of Catholic education around the globe. That is to say, patterns that we saw in different areas of research in Catholic education around the world, not just in the US, but again, all over, affirming that an education is the single most effective way out of poverty, that a good education is also a pathway to overall well-being and human flourishing. In places where Catholic schools were abundant and successful, they were also a source of social harmony and cohesion. That is to say, because of the activity of the school and its attached church, there were social patterns, travel, meals, common social events that the Catholic faith, well lived out in this context of parish and school, was good for the social fabric of a community, and this is particularly important in developing countries. There was universal affirmation that Catholic schools are not only good for the church, they're good for society, they're good for civic reasons. And then even in countries where there was somewhat of political oppression or disrespect for religion in general, it was hard to find any who disrespected the value of Catholic schools. Of all the things that the church does, it was perhaps the most universally respected and valued. The World Congress was intended, I think, as an affirmation from the highest echelons of the church of the importance of Catholic education moving forward in this age of the new evangelization. You may know too that the Holy Father has a plan afoot to sort of reform the Vatican. The Roman Curia, which I playfully call the Pope's cabinet, that's not the best metaphor, but it's one Americans understand. I've always been fond of pointing out that the Pope's cabinet, the Roman Curia, only has 9 major offices, and one of them is dedicated to Catholic education around the world at every level. I've always pointed it out as an important point to show the value that the church places on education, that the Pope's cabinet has an office dedicated just to that. In the reform of the Roman Curia, the Pope is piloting, or has piloted, a plan, and just recently circulated a draft of a new apostolic constitution called Predicate Evangelium, Preach the Gospel, proposing a reorganization of his cabinet, the first since John Paul II. Say, well, why is this important? Well, if it's important that one of the 9 offices is Catholic education, then a reorganization of the office is an important thing too. You will notice in the previous, or the current version of the cabinet, although they're not necessarily ranked in order here, we know from practice, if not from policy, that the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith has typically functioned as the first office, or I don't want to say the most important one, but the leading office. The Italians call the Congregation of Doctrine of the Faith La Suprema, the first one, the supreme one, because in recent decades, especially with John Paul II and Pope Benedict, the congregation exercised an oversight responsibility, mostly about doctrine and correct teaching, one might say orthodoxy. So much so that even educational concerns, you may remember in the 1990s, the debate around Ex Corde Ecclesiae, even got moved from the Congregation of Catholic Education to the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, because it was considered a matter of doctrine, so La Suprema took it over. In Predicate Evangelium, the Pope's proposing a new organization of the Curia, starting by calling the offices dicasteries, not congregations, which leads some to think that there may be an openness to having lay men and women be the head of congregations rather than cardinals. And in the new schema, the dicastery for evangelization is now the head. Or said another way, in Pope Francis' mind, evangelization should be La Suprema, the first one, so that all the other congregations, when they publish, when they write, when they hold conferences, when they issue documents, will be encouraged to articulate their position and their teaching by answering the question, how does this help advance evangelization? Not that orthodoxy isn't important, or not that the Congregation of Doctrine of Faith is important. It's a different emphasis of Francis to say, we need to get together on evangelization. And as a matter of fact, the congregation, or the dicastery for evangelization, has 2 sort of sub-offices. One they call the first evangelization, preaching to missionary countries that haven't heard the gospel. The second called the second re-evangelization, or the re-evangelization, namely the preaching of the gospel to those who have heard it, but have somehow gotten lukewarm in their practice. He also proposes some new congregations, new dicasteries for charity and communication, laity, and family life. But the reorganization of evangelization as La Suprema, especially given the predilection support for Catholic education, is, I think, significant. I say all that to suggest that the work of Catholic education at every level is important to the new evangelization, is important to Pope Francis, it's important to us. I said at the outset I wanted to say a little bit about our history and success before talking about the challenges, because I think the Holy Father has laid out a road that's very challenging for us. The history of Catholic education in our country, as everyone here I'm sure knows, is really founded on the sacrifice of religious men and women, mostly religious women, who in the years gone by built a K-12 educational system pretty much on their poverty. You may have seen this famous photo from summer school at the University of Notre Dame. This is on the Bond Hall, the former architecture building. And you can see, I don't know if my pointer is working here. You can see they're pretty much all religious sisters of different habits, a handful of priests and brothers here, and just 2 or 3 wannabes right here in the middle. When these women staffed Catholic schools, they look like this, 40 and 50 to a classroom. But that was 70 years ago. Summer school at the University of Notre Dame now looks like this. These are ACE folks a few years ago. You will notice they are pretty much all lay men and women, except you see there are 2 Nashville Dominicans right there. But a complete shift in terms of the human resources supporting Catholic schools. And of course, schools look like this today. These people, however, gave us a great legacy in their sacrifices for Catholic schools. They sacrificed so much and for so long, we are still in many ways recovering. One of the reasons we have an ACE program at the University of Notre Dame, and many other universities have started similar programs. One of the reasons we have a principal preparation program, and many other Catholic universities have started similar programs, was because these folks weren't there anymore. And not only weren't they there anymore, but when we started to supply them with the lay leaders and lay men and women coming forward, they didn't bring the benefit of their religious formation and their lived and practiced faith. They didn't have the spiritual formation in religious communities. And so many of us, myself included, have spent a career trying to develop teacher education and principal preparation programs that blend the knowledge base of education and leadership with the wisdom and riches and tradition of Catholicism and Catholic theology. That challenge is ongoing and remains still to be met. K-12 Catholic schools in the U.S. as academic institutions have been tremendously successful over the years. Even in the analyses of the federal government and the U.S. Department of Education, who, depending on the administration, are often no friends of private education, acknowledge, even in their own tests that are given, that Catholic schools do very well, among the best in the country. Federal studies are not often fond of breaking out Catholic schools individually. They tend to lump all religious schools as private, but Catholic, as I'm sure you know, is the largest segment of the private school market. When we look at research on school effectiveness, such as the federal test, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, commonly reported as the nation's report card, Catholic schools are very successful overall academically. There's even in educational research something known as the Catholic school effect. You can Google it later, but at those good things that redound to you by being in Catholic school. I'll just rehearse a few of them quickly. Again, Catholic school students are the largest segment of private school students, but in some federal research they don't break out Catholic, they just say private. Private school students are more likely to attain college degrees. In the federal standard, a recent study, they looked at 2,002 graduates, and they give them 10 years to graduate high school, graduate college. That's a long time. You probably wouldn't be comfortable with a 10-year window for, but Catholic school students graduate from college almost twice the rate. If we look at ACT scores, public and private, you see private ed, again, demonstrably higher than the public sector. Excuse the fuzziness there. Looking at composite ACT scores, ACT is one of the tests, one of the national tests given for college readiness. You can see again, well, if you want to talk about an achievement gap, you might say, looking at the numbers, 22.3 Hispanic Latino in private school, and all students 23.8. It's pretty close to closing the achievement gap. We look back at the NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, and recent scores. Again, see Catholic schools students significantly outperforming public school students. Academically, almost universally good news. The U.S. Bishops' Conference has also been very interested in what's going on in Catholic schools. We put together several studies for the Bishops' Conference, helping them to understand the investment that the church has in Catholic schools and the kind of effects you can expect from Catholic schools. It focused a lot on what I mentioned earlier as Catholic schools being good for civic society, just good for human flourishing in general, good at closing the achievement gap, and doing it, do a cost-benefit ratio, just doing it much more inexpensively than what happens in the public school. So for the sake of things like voucher programs, which we're blessed to have here in Ohio, we've been making the argument that Catholic schools are really good for society. Of course, they're good for the church and good for the spreading of the faith, but they're really good for the democracy. They're good for the republic. They model good behavior. They create functional communities. Our teachers and students are highly engaged. Absentee rates are lower in Catholic schools than in other schools. Attendance rates are higher. Longevity of faculty is higher. It'll come of no surprise to anyone here that a faith-based orientation in a school helps to build coherence and integration across disciplines, that there's something beneficial in the academic arena to having a religious environment. I have a couple of colleagues at the University of Notre Dame, Peg Brinig on the left here and Nicole Garnett on the right, who wrote a book recently of studying the closing of Catholic schools in Chicago. The book is called Lost Classrooms, Lost Community, Catholic Schools and the Importance of Urban America. Inner city Chicago, Cook County, Chicago, has closed an inordinate number of Catholic schools in recent decades for a lot of reasons, some population shifts, some financial struggles. And Peg and Nicole, Peg's a property lawyer actually, they were interested on what the effect of closing a Catholic school was in the urban core. And if I may generalize their finding, it's kind of caught in the title, that when a Catholic school leaves a community, when a Catholic school closes, and often the parish church it's associated with follows, the community tends to deteriorate. At least that's what happened in Chicago. Crime rates went up, vandalism went up, violent crimes went up. There was a social fabric that sort of fell apart, that when the school and parish were present there, was kind of held together. Peg and Nicole concluded that Catholic schools create social cohesion. They bring people together, and they're good for the neighborhood. Catholic schools are also the inventors of service projects and the wisdom of service learning and having young people study a social problem or social concern and then get out there in the community and try to do something about it, which have led Peg and Nicole to say that supporting a Catholic school is actually, it's good for society overall. Catholic high school students are more likely to vote. They earn higher wages. They are more civically engaged. They're more tolerant of diversity. They're more committed to service as adults. If there are any pastors among us, graduates of Catholic school tend to give more in the collection on Sunday than Catholics who don't go to Catholic school. So the overall academic news and pro-social news is, I think, good. We have broad academic achievement. We have civic engagement. We have social cohesion. By and large, the news about the effectiveness of Catholic schools is good. So one would think we are poised to meet the challenges of the new evangelization and respond to the World Congress and the Pope's challenge to have Catholic education be an instrument of the new evangelization. With all that good news, praise from the Vatican, solicitude from the Pope, overwhelming evidence from the research about school effectiveness, you would think that society in large would be breaking down the doors to get into these institutions. Alas, they are not. The enrollment challenges in K-12 Catholic schools for the last 19 years have been significant. Interestingly, in the decade 1990 to 2000, Catholic school enrollment was pretty flat. It upticked about 70,000 nationally, but statistically flat. But every year since the year 2000, every year since the new millennium, for 19 consecutive years now, there has been a steady downturn in national Catholic school enrollment. I graphed it. It looks like this. I started back at 1880 for fun. I'm glad this is big. Usually some people can't see this. So the peak year of Catholic school enrollment overall nationally was 1964 with 5.6 million. This year we're down to 1.7 million. You can see, as I mentioned, kind of the leveling off in 1990 to 2000. We're coming down here. It kind of leveled off for 10 years. On a normal graph, it looks just like this. So the bottom line is Catholic high school. The top line is elementary. So you take that in just for a second. One might say, looking at the graph, that Catholic elementary schools, K-8 schools, have suffered the most serious decline and continue to do so. High schools, on the other hand, the enrollment looks fairly stable. I mean, it's not a good thing that they're down, but you'll notice as a line, it's comparatively flat compared to the trend at the top line. I pointed out to say that running a high school is complicated, it's expensive, a lot of moving parts, and if you weren't running a good high school or not running a good high school and haven't thought through things well, chances are market forces have already forced you out of business. The high schools that remain in this flat line are places that are succeeding and doing a good job. Elementaries, on the other hand, many still, most commonly parish-based, still struggling every year with enrollment of students and in closing schools. So this is fun by diocese. Enrollment in the 18 largest dioceses, you're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you're at 6, I guess. But you can see just in the period of the last 25 years or so, significant drops everywhere, and some really big ones like, I mean, look at Detroit here, Chicago. Same data, cut a different way. The 9 states with the highest Catholic school enrollment, so we're looking at the whole state. We'll take Ohio for fun. So Ohio's down, 40,000 students or so. New York, 80,000, it's huge. Pennsylvania, about 70. So I pointed out to say it's a bit of a conundrum with all of the success that we see going on. The enrollment is on a steady downward trajectory. If I can just, number-wise, show you the difference between high school and elementary. So high school enrollment in this period of time from 95 down 12%. Again, not good, but fairly stable compared to elementary. When you look at elementary, it's gone from 2.6 million in 1995-96 to 1.2 million today. You can do the math, but I've done it. It's over half the population. Oops. Different graph of the same data. Now with the numbers. Again, you can see the flatness of high school enrollment, but its continued decline and the steep decline in the elementary population. Interestingly enough, this is one way to kind of look at future projections and where Catholic school enrollments might go. Interestingly enough, when we look at Catholic infant baptisms and then try to project infant baptisms 5 or 6 years forward to say, you know, if you're baptized today, 5 years from now you should be in kindergarten, 6 years from now you should be in first grade. What's the percentage of first graders enrolled in Catholic school once you count the baptisms? As I'm sure you know, the church keeps track of baptisms, so we know how many baptisms there are in any given year in a diocese or in a state or in a country. And when we look back, the number is fairly stable. Even as far back as 2005, which is 14, 15 years ago, 1 out of 5 students who were baptized Catholic would be in Catholic school. In 2012, which is the last period we have data for, it's 15%, which is about 1 in 6. So from the point of view of marketing and enrollment in the future, there are a lot of empty seats in K-12 Catholic schools, not just in this part of the country, but in this whole sector, there are a lot of empty seats. Of all the young people that are baptized Catholic, it looks like 1 in 6 end up in a Catholic school. That means 5 don't, 5 aren't. So there's a lot of growth area there. Students who were baptized in 2013 should be in first grade now. So we haven't counted them yet. So you have to excuse the lag here on the data. It wasn't because I was sleeping, just because it takes time to get it. So, excuse me. I'd like to point out just one more fairly complicated thing, and then I'd love to have some conversation and hear your comments and questions. Can you see this okay? I want to explain a little bit of this just to make the point and convince you, in case you're already not convinced, that the Holy Father is saying something important in calling for a new evangelization and an evangelization of culture and sort of a renaissance of the faith, of which we hope schools can be a part. So we'll look at the colored lines. The top line, the orange line, Last time I called it orange, someone said, Father, that's brown, you're colorblind, but you know which one I'm talking about there, the top one. As you can see, is the percentage of adults in American population who self-report as Catholic. All right, it's 23%. There's no test there, it's just if you say you're Catholic, all right? So 23%. Most people aren't good at dividing at 23, so will you indulge me and make it 25? Let's round, say 25% of adult Catholics, adult Americans say they're Catholic. That's 1 in 4, okay? So 1 in 4 Catholic adults, 1 in 4 American adults say they're Catholic. Now, if we were going to study something in society and look for Catholic representation, that's the number we're going to use, right? 1 in 4. So let's just say for fun, I want to study bank robbers. I want to go to jails and study bank robbers, and I'm going to ask the bank robbers what faith you have, what church you belong to growing up. What's my hypothesis going to be with percentage they're going to be Catholic? They should be 25%, right? It should be 1 in 4, right? If they're, well, let's hope it's not. Now, it's like 2% Catholic, right? And then what are we going to say? We're going to say, well, what is it about being Catholic that doesn't make you be a bank robber, right? You with me? So we do it the other way and say, the Supreme Court justices, right? There's 9, right? There should be 25% Catholic, right? Should be what? 2. How many are there? See, that's wrong. Why are Catholics overrepresented in the court, right? What is it about the legal profession and judging that makes it attractive to You're with me, all right? So it's 25%. We'll go back to the blue line. The blue line is infant baptisms as a percentage of all live U.S. births. Again, government keeps track of all the babies born in the country. Of all the babies born in the country, what percentage should be Catholic? About 25. The blue line says, only 20%. There are 5% of babies being born to Catholic families who are not getting baptized. We're losing them at birth. Not good for the church. Certainly not good for Catholic schools. You with me? All right, we'll go down the yellow line. The yellow line is funerals. Funerals as a percentage of all U.S. deaths. We keep track of everybody who dies in the United States, of everybody who dies, all American people who die on our soil. What percentage should be Catholic? About 25%, right? You'll see the orange, or the yellow line, the gold line there, down to 16. Now we lost a full 9-10% there of Catholics who are dying aren't getting the benefit of the funeral. And last but not least, the gray line is church marriages as a percentage of all U.S. marriages. The probate court in every county keeps track of everybody who gets legally married, of all the marriages in the United States. What percentage should be Catholic? 25. 2010, it was 8, which is a huge number, a huge loss of Catholic people getting married, not going to the church. Again, certainly not good for the church and good for Catholic schools. Chances are, if you're not baptized, not married in the church, your proclivity to participate in the life of the parish or attend the Catholic school grows slim. So I point that out and explain it as such to offer my concurrence and invite yours with the Holy Father's insight that a new evangelization is needed at every level of the church. A reinvigorization of the faith is needed at every level of Catholic life, in parishes, in schools, in universities. The idea that evangelization should be the first concern of the church and of the Pope's Curia is probably right on target. And given the great success we've seen in the history of Catholic schools in the United States, given the millions of students that we have educated and continue to educate, it seems likely that any renaissance of the faith and any reinvigorization of Catholic life is certainly going to include Catholic schools. It is hard to imagine a rebirth of Catholic life and Catholic faith in this country without a vibrant and robust system of Catholic education. Let me stop there and take a question or a comment. Please.
Father, nice presentation. But on that one graph with elementary schools on it, you need to put an asterisk, because in 1967, St. Pascal's, where I went, we beat Jason on football in 8th grade. Jason's a local heavyweight. That's just a joke.
Well aware.
But I guess my question is, what are we going to do about this? What are we going to do about this problem? And the other thing I wanted to know was, I know in Ohio we have vouchers. How many other states have vouchers for Catholic schools?
There are, I want to say, 17 voucher programs, but there are different kinds of parental choice programs. Some states have tuition tax credits, some have education savings accounts, and when you include all those, there's about 23 states.
Because a big part of it is the money.
A big part of it is the money. Agreed. Yeah. Please.
I mean, I think one of the things to look at is that picture you had with all the priests and the nuns.
Yes.
It was free, not free, but they had very low cost labor. And as things have changed, now that you have lay people that have to pay for families and whatnot, the prices have gone up and people can't afford it. Is that, part of that issue that's happening, why people aren't sending their kids to grade schools, Catholic grade schools and Catholic high schools? And how do you solve that problem?
Yeah, no, for sure. Cost is a part of it. However, we've studied this question. Several local and national studies. So individual dioceses have studied the question. The NCEA, the National Catholic Organization, has studied it as well. Price only explains about 15 or 16% of the variance in Catholic school enrollment. Let me say it another way. There are plenty of young Catholic families, plenty of young Catholic parents who can well afford a Catholic education for their children, but still don't pick it, still don't choose it. Well, it's a matter of priorities then, right? Now, I don't want to say that there's no finance. There is a certain segment of the population, absolutely, but there is that only doesn't explain the whole issue. Tim.
So they don't see the value because they might look at it as less product, it has less quality. Maybe the culture's changed. What are we doing to help coach up the schools in order to improve culture and quality?
I agree with your first conclusion. In many cases, we have lost the value proposition for Catholic education for a lot of different reasons. Now, what was the question?
Let's stick with that. Is it winnable to get back? Is the value proposition winnable to get back? And what are we doing to provide that, the resources to provide that value proposition that will carry the day?
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, I think so, especially given, most of the news is good in terms of education. Maybe some of the news in the broader church is not good, but in terms of education, the news is good. The operation of a system of schools, nationwide is, I don't want to overstate the case, but it's among the most effective things the church runs. And because in education we measure things too. We have tests and we have scores. There's an accountability mechanism in Catholic education that even the broader church can learn from. So I think as far as schools and universities go, they're among the best things, if not the best thing the church has going, I think. Please.
That doesn't account for the family who has 4 children and wants to put 5 or 6 in, and maybe they get a cut in tuition, but when they start paying that kind of money, the value proposition sinks. And the parents don't send the older children. And there comes a point in time when they begin to drop out. I happen to sit on a parish in a fairly generous area on the finance council. And this issue of setting teacher salaries fairly and compensating teachers at the level they should be compensated at, and charging fair tuition is the most difficult proposition you deal with every year, and every year you lose students. And you lose students from larger families who, once they get to 2 and 3, they can't afford it anymore, and a whole family goes. So I personally believe we hit the nail on the head right at the first answer. Money is the answer, and the church has got to help families and parishes figure out ways to generate substantial amounts of money to provide quality education throughout. And my school is K-8, and we see it. We're being told already to think in terms of regionalization, because we have over 300 students in the school now. Our projection is we will have fewer as we move forward. And we need to be looking around at other parishes who are challenged in the same way, and what schools will survive as regional schools. And that will simply perpetuate the downhill headcount. And so I think the answer is money. I think the gentleman who said, when we went to school back in the day, all the nuns there, wonderful nuns, didn't cost our parents anything.
Let me play devil's advocate for a moment, though. I understand and am sympathetic to the situation. It's a common one, I'm sure, that's shared with the salary question. But the conclusion that money is the solution it reminds me of sort of the people who want to win the lottery, play the lottery, win the lottery. Sometimes I have relatives that call from out of state and say, play the lottery, because they can't play it, because they have this fantasy that money is going to solve the problem. And I'll give you this example. So I've just come home from teaching in Australia this term. Catholic University in Western Australia in Perth. Catholic schools in Australia are publicly funded by law. Every school gets the same per pupil allocation. So kids leave your public school to come to my Catholic school, the money follows, and they have all the money they want, right? They've got all the resources. You know what they're struggling with? Declining enrollment, lack participation in faith, lack participation in church life. I flew all the way over there to talk to them and work with them about what's a Catholic school look like and what kind of Catholic identity should a school have. The same is going on in Ireland right now. And I'm going to Canada in a couple of weeks to have the same conversation with them. And they all have publicly funded, quote unquote, wealthy Catholic schools. They have all the money they want, but they still have this struggle with evangelization. Now, I'm not saying I don't want the money. I want to challenge the idea that money is the answer.
Father, when you thank you for the presentation, for all the great work that ACE does. When you think about schools that ACE students work with, what are some success stories of schools that put evangelization first? What are some of the things that those parishes and schools do to put evangelization first?
No, it's a great question. I'm oversimplifying, but I'll cut to the chase. When young people have significant work to do and have significant responsibility in the life of the parish and the life of the school, and I don't mean volunteerism or liturgical ministries, I mean significant responsibilities for the life of faith, the school and the parish community tend to prosper. It tends to bless everyone. I don't say that to demean the adult community or the senior community of which I'm a member, but young people having significant responsibility in the life and role is a hallmark, and you don't see an awful lot of that. Even in a good youth ministry program, you don't see an awful lot of that. If I can use an ecumenical example, I'm thinking of the Mormons who go out on a year of mission, or 2 years of mission, and responsible for, recruiting new people to the faith. I mean, they have the lowest recidivism of anybody. right? You grow up a Mormon, chances are you're going to be a Mormon. Their retention rates are like in the 90%, second, I think, only to Orthodox Jews. But it's having that investment in some significant work. Yeah. Please, way in the back.
Hi, Father. My name is Blake Yoho. I'm a grad student here at John Carroll.
Hi, Blake.
I come from a charter school background
Mm-hmm.
in Boston, so I was looking at this at a lens from Catholic population in areas.
Yeah.
And looking at the NCEA data, it
Yeah.
shows that Catholic school enrollment by population has actually stayed the same or increased in the Great Lakes and the Plains region, which is where most Catholics are in the U.S. So my question is, coming from a charter school and urban centers where a large majority of the U.S. has population, how are we as Catholics competing with a lot of secondary charter schools that are taking away population in Catholic secondary schools?
Yeah, well, I'm not a big fan. Yeah, if you Google me, you will find one of the most famous top 10 quotes was Catholic schools, charter schools are the single greatest threat to Catholic schools in the inner city. I stand by that, but what I would like to see happen as a matter of policy, to get back to this gentleman's question, that we support all educational endeavors equally. So the parents have options for charters, I think is a great idea, but it's hard to compete with a charter school that's free when the Catholic school costs. So I think that's what the remedies such as vouchers and tuition tax credits and education savings accounts are after, namely to give parents, who are the primary educators of their children, a choice in how their children get educated and how their tax dollars are spent. That's the way it works in Australia, Ireland, UK. That's the way it works. The market, there's competition in the market, and you, in Canada anyway, you indicate what school you want to get your tax dollars, the public school, the Jewish school, the Catholic school, whatever. And it makes schools better because, again, if my school, has a teacher or two that aren't producing or they can't make the parents pleased, 25 kids go to your school, the money follows them to your school, which is a strong incentive to make the school better. So I think some policy work there can help level the playing field. Right now the playing field's not level.
Thank you.
Please.
Yeah, Father, I think Blake brought up a good point when he was talking about the closing of schools in the regions and looking at the populations themselves also. I think that would improve kind of the stats you had up there.
Mm-hmm.
Like you showed a couple of slides where you had states where we're closing Catholic schools and cities where we're closing Catholic schools. And I don't really know demographics, but I can tell you that like the top 5 cities of growth in the United States, those aren't the ones that were listed.
Right.
And so I guess my question is, when you look at places like Atlanta and Phoenix and places where we've had a lot of growth of population, are we making moves to have more Catholic education in those cities that are growing in the United States?
Not at the rate you would suspect. So a new Catholic high school opened in Texas recently. There haven't been any new openings in Phoenix. So the South and West are very underbuilt. I have family in Orlando, in the Diocese of Orlando, and growing on the wealthier side. You know how many Catholic high schools there are in Orlando? 1 in the city, and it's in the wrong side of the city. And not a bad side of the city. It's just they built it so long ago. It's not where the people are. They could probably fill 3 tomorrow. But they have 1. Yeah. Phoenix, I'm not sure about off the top of my head. Please.
One more question, and then I want to invite you also to light refreshments in the atrium outside. So, sir, please.
Yes.
Your comment about the retention rate with the Mormons and the Orthodox Jews
Yes.
intrigued me in regards to the article, I think it was last year in the Notre Dame magazine,
Mm-hmm.
about the retired Archbishop from Tampa that stayed on campus
for a semester.
Bob Lynch, yes.
And what struck me is that he stated, and he's very much surprised, I wasn't, that most of the students come to Notre Dame not knowing the sacraments.
Mm-hmm.
And from a religious standpoint, I think he said a lot, especially in relationship to what you said about the nuns. And I think somewhere along the line, that proposition of not knowing the sacraments said a lot in more ways than one.
Mm-hmm. No, I think you're right, and there's a trajectory there, and Notre Dame has experienced that as well. So, the common talk on the street is, Notre Dame's a Catholic Disneyland, right? But in terms of the changing of student population and even changes in the faculty, I mean, over the years that's changed. I've been there 20 years, and it's changed considerably. So, yeah, people are coming. Undergrads are coming to the university from an entirely different place, likely because of the K-12 experience they had or they didn't have. Yeah, no, agreed.
Well, everyone,
thank you so much.
A round of applause.
Thank you.